And will it make it so all of us will appear?
Pardon?
Will it make it so everybody will appear?
Well, let's see. Yes, yeah, everybody will be in us all the same.
And the sound is on.
Yeah, it's recording right now.
Oh, it is?
We are recording.
We are recording. Well, I'd like to call to order our meeting for February 3rd, 2021. It's, I have to check the time, 6:06 p.m. And I'm Joy Porter, and if the rest would introduce themselves too, please.
Ann Nichols. Tamala, you're on.
Hello, what am I doing?
Just
You're
introduce yourself, Tamala.
Huh?
Just introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Tamala Wright.
I'm Michelle Anthony. I'm the senior planner.
I'm Dylan Becker, Planner 1.
Great.
So for first order of business is the election of officers. Now, Ann, do we elect me again, or do we just continue it, or how do we do it?
Yes, what I had indicated is it's our custom for officers to serve for 2 years. So
Okay.
Joy has only served for a little less than a year, and same for Doug. So I would move that we reappoint Joy as chair and Doug as vice chair.
Yeah,
Okay.
I second it. You're just getting your feet wet when you're doing that first year.
That's
Right.
true, Tam.
Want to call the question or call the vote?
All in favor, say aye or raise your hands.
I
Okay. That's unanimous, Michelle.
Okay. Good.
There's so few of us.
yeah. Right.
Unanimous makes it seem like we're a really large group. At this time then, we'd like to go to the approval of the minutes. I don't know if everyone got a chance to read them.
I wasn't there, so I abstained.
Okay. I read
Well,
over them. I didn't notice anything, but I sometimes
Same here. I would move approval as presented.
and I would second it. And then all in favor would be yes.
Yes.
And Joy.
Since you guys made the motion and seconded, I assume you
We
want
were
to.
going to
Yeah.
go rogue and vote against it, right?
Yeah, really.
Just to get a
Great.
negative vote in there. So this time we're going to move on to the applicant, and just to go over what's going to happen, Michelle is going to present it to us and we can ask her any clarifying questions. Our applicant then will present anything they need to present and we'll listen and ask questions. At that time, we will open it up to the public. If there's not any public comments, then we will close and then bring it back to the commission and discuss the different aspects of this application. And then at that time, we will vote and decide. And does anyone have any ex parte or any conflicts of interest with 106 Washington?
No.
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead then. This is for the MCAC 2101, the material change of appearance certification, construction of a detached garage, 106 Washington Avenue. Mark Gilliand of Cornerstone Design Ltd, applicant on behalf of Jason Rash, who is the owner. So Michelle.
No, I don't see the applicant in the attendees section here.
You don't see Mark
Mm-mm.
or Jason?
Or Jason.
Hmm.
Do you think they didn't think have to come again, or?
I know he knew about it because I had talked to him and gotten some amended information from him. Let me just real quickly talk among yourselves for a minute.
How's everybody been? Healthy, I hope?
Yes, doing pretty well. Warm weather though, isn't it?
Wonderful today.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah, I heard it's supposed to get cold and really, really windy and
Oh, not
maybe
more.
some snow up in upper elevations, I think. Anyway, I talked to the applicant. Unfortunately, he's gotten stuck on the road somewhere. So, I mean, not stuck, but he's out on the road somewhere, didn't get in like he thought he was going to. So he's asked if I can just try to handle it. If there are questions, I can try to call him. And, you know, if there's things that either I can't answer or I can't get a hold of him to answer, then, you know, we'll have to deal with that. But if that's okay, I think we could continue the hearing and I'll just try to field questions as I can or try to get a hold of him.
I think that would be okay because we have heard from him before.
yes,
We know
Yeah,
he-
I mean, I think you all are pretty familiar with the property. So
yes.
anyway, so that is the update regarding that. As we have discussed, there was another design that was approved last month by the HPC. After that action, staff brought up some issues with the proposed variances that caused the applicant to rethink some of the distances and to look at how he could provide more, particularly in the rear yard, more distance to the adjacent property to the south. And so that caused him to both reorient the building so that now the garage doors face Washington Avenue, but also make some minor changes to the size of the building and finally also give us a couple of options in regard to the roof line. I had suggested, staff had suggested that because it was now being oriented, so you weren't really looking at the side of the garage, you were actually looking at full on the front of the garage, that potentially a roof line that matched more closely the front of the house. And there's Bobby.
Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Bobby.
Bobby,
I'm sorry,
should
go
I
ahead.
ask Bobby if he wants to come on? Do you want to come on tonight, Bobby? Oh, you're muted.
You gotta unmute, Bobby.
Unmute, yeah, unmute yourself.
There's a Doug in the attendees section, but I'm not sure if that's Doug Edmondson or not. I'm gonna promote them real quick to see.
All right.
Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Bobby.
Hi,
Hi
Bobby.
there.
Oh, it
There's
is.
Doug.
There's Doug.
There I
Alright.
am.
It is
Wow,
Doug.
everybody. Okay.
Things all here.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Doug.
I apologize. I'm in Denver. I was trying to use my iPad and it didn't work. So
Alright.
I am here via phone.
Okay. Well, actually, it's pretty good for the phone. I had just started the 106 Washington review.
Yeah, no, I've been through the documents. I'm aware.
Okay,
I'm
great,
good.
Are you
great,
ready, Bobby? Glad you're here.
I'm good.
good.
Glad to see everybody.
Hey. So basically that's staff realized with those changes that it needed to come back through HPC for re-review and approval. And so that's where we are tonight. So the changes that were made that you all are most interested in, besides reorientation of the building, they did separate the garage doors. So now it has two separate garage doors facing Washington. What we call the people door, the regular entry door, and then there's a third overhead door are actually around on the side that you can't see from Washington. So they were able to shrink the length of the building or the width of the building a little bit, and then they didn't have, with the separation of the garage doors and taking a couple of feet off of the width of the building, they didn't have room for the pedestrian door. So that's gotten moved and now it's no longer visible to Washington Avenue. There were, as I had mentioned, two roof form options provided. One is the single gable, single slope shed roof that had been previously approved. And then the second option is a hipped roof that is more similar to the main roof lines on the existing structure. Option 1 still provides the long, narrow, clerestory style windows above the garage doors and on the back of the garage, and a smaller window on the Lafayette elevation. The option 2, which is the hipped roof, it eliminates the bank of windows above the garage doors. They just don't have the clearance room. It creates a shorter building wall at that side. And then the other openings would be the same as on the other design. Still stucco trim and roofing to match the existing house are all proposed. So the guidelines that pertain to the request in regard to building alignment, the alignment of the garage as proposed is acceptable. There are a variety of alignments for garages that are already on Washington. A number of them face the street. A number of them are side loaded. It's kind of all options are up there. Building orientation, there are both, as I noted, side loaded and front loaded garages in the area. So that's consistent with other already constructed improvements. The building height, the garage is a single story. That's typical to other garages in the area, although we do have a couple of examples of more carriage house style with a second floor on them, but this one is appropriately only a single floor. The mass and scale, so there is the slightly reduced size of the building does benefit the mass and scale. It appears to staff that the proposed orientation presents an elevation that's similar in width to the Washington elevation of the existing home. You kind of can look at the existing building and the width of the garage and see how those coordinate. New buildings, in regard to building materials, the proposed exterior will be stuccoed to match the home. Requiring an exterior treatment different than the house wouldn't create a contributing situation and would not allow the secondary structure to be coordinated in appearance with what is now the primary building, the home on the property. So in regard to roof form, option 1, the shed roof, from staff's understanding, is preferred by the property owner, and that's what was previously proposed. That now reflects the now contemporary appearance of the home. Staff supported that design at the January meeting because the previous proposal placed the narrower dimension of the garage facing the street, which allowed the angle of the roof to be seen at the street, and that reflected the large shed roof addition on the east side of the house. So you had that coordination between an angle that was appearing on the east and then the angle of the new garage. However, because the garage had to be reoriented, you don't get that angle from Washington Avenue anymore. And so staff feels that the hipped roof treatment reflects the main roof lines on the building, on the existing house, and coordinates better with this orientation. Certainly the commission should consider both of them and discuss the options. If it needs to be discussed with the applicant, we'll give him a call. However, after looking at the revised plans, proposed option 2, the hipped roof, appears most appropriate to staff. Roof materials, the materials will be the same as on the existing house, which is a dark brown composition shingle. Under garages, in the design guidelines, the guideline for garages in Chapter 9, the garage is oriented to face into Washington Avenue and now features 2 single garage doors in a carriage house style, as recommended by the guidelines for street facing garages. So that is consistent with the guidelines. One thing that was discussed at the last meeting was the stone wall that is on Lafayette and then wraps around the southern property line between this property and the house to the south on Lafayette. The guideline says preserve all existing stone walls, bridges, and stairs. So it appears that the wall is likely to require the replacement to support the new construction. At least that's what they're looking at. Certainly, if the wall could be retained with the little bit of additional room that the applicant has proposed, then that would be a great option. If it's just not physically possible, and with the condition of the wall, I'm just not sure whether it's going to hold up, given that there's construction that close to it. Then, you know, they do need to, if they do need to put in the concrete wall, then staff is recommending that that be clad with the stone salvage from any of the existing retaining wall that's removed. One thing that was mentioned, not in the application, but in a communication to staff, was there might be some interest in actually bringing that wall up much higher, not necessarily for retainage purposes, but to transition into using it like a fence. Staff would not recommend that. Staff doesn't feel that that is appropriate. There wouldn't be a good way to camouflage that what would end up being a large, tall concrete retaining wall / fence, and even cladding that whole thing in stone would create a much larger element than what's currently there, and just wouldn't be compatible with the scale of other things going on in the area. So staff is recommending that the wall, if it is replaced, be clad in the stone along Lafayette, and for that to turn the corner and go back at least to the point where that wall would be blocked from view as it passes past the house to the south. So if you were looking up Lafayette or from that property to the south, that you would still see a stone wall in that area, approximately the same height as what's there now. Exterior light fixtures, those haven't yet been provided. Staff is consistent with last month's recommendation and last month's approval. Staff has noted that that can be provided for staff review and approval. The applicant is aware of the need to use cutoff shields and downward or downward cast fixtures. So staff recommends the revised proposal option 2 as consistent with the purpose of the historic preservation regulations by encouraging private ownership and use of properties within the district, and recommends approval of MCAC, and that's 2101. Apologize for that. For the construction of a new 2-car garage at 106 Washington, with the conditions as follows. Number 1, the hipped roof option 2 is approved as shown on the site plan and elevation drawings provided to the planning department on January 21st, 2021. 2, if concrete is used to connect the garage to the street, it shall be colored per the city's adopted formula. Alternatively, pavers or asphalt shall be utilized. Number 3, lighting information, fixtures, and specifications shall be provided to the planning department as part of the property improvement permit plans. And number 4, if all or a significant portion of the existing stone retaining wall along the Lafayette property frontage and between the subject property and that to the south can remain intact, it should do so. If replacement of all or a portion of the existing retaining wall is required to allow the new construction, the new wall shall not be significantly higher than the grade necessary to support the new construction and shall be clad with the stone salvaged from the removal of the existing wall. Cladding of a new retaining wall along the southern lot line of the subject property shall be done from the corner adjacent to Lafayette east to a point where the adjacent home blocks any transition to concrete. Mortar used to secure the salvage stone shall be colored to blend with the stone. And that's the summary of staff's report.
Thank you, Michelle. Questions for Michelle? Michelle, I had one question. Was in the recommendations from the staff when you said about not significantly higher, do we need more detail than that 10 feet is significantly higher, or? do you think, because I wouldn't want to have that poured, not that they would do it,
Well, we'll have to have, there will be engineered drawings for the retaining wall. And so
okay,
that is something that staff can check when those plans are provided and when we permit to make sure that it's not, several feet above the grade or way above the grade that needs to be supported. Usually walls will come up a little bit, 6 inches, maybe a foot,
Yeah.
but not much more than that.
so do we need to put that in the recommendations if that's where we decide to go, or is this something that you and planning would do with the plans?
I think I'm comfortable noting it the way that I've recommended.
Okay.
I know what the intent is. If you all feel like it needs to be more specific, I would only caution about trying to specify a specific height, because
See that, 'cause
I can't tell you right now what the height of the existing wall exactly is.
and we
So,
no, that's okay. I'm all right. I just wanted to-
great.
um, And then will the elevation then of the garage sort of be near where the house is? In other words, will it be about the same elevation?
Actually, the top of the garage, since the house is actually a 2-story,
Uh-huh.
it's got an upper level, the garage actually will be lower
Oh, okay.
than the house. And you can kind of see that on the photos. So the garage will sit back just a little bit more from Washington than the house does. And then the photos, probably one of the better ones, potentially, let's see, is it's probably the one that's right below the sub-district map, and it's a little bit of an angle, but you can see how the front of the house kind of comes out. It has actually a couple of hipped roofs. It's a pretty tall, it's not really a second floor, but that's actually the upper floor. It dives down a little bit into the grade. So it's a good first, one floor from the street, but I believe that the garage is just a little bit shorter.
Okay.
So it won't quite have the same height presence as the house does.
Does anyone have any more questions for Michelle before we open it up to Michelle as the applicant?
Yeah.
Michelle, can you give me a minute? I have some comments, but I have to go get my battery charger. My battery's getting low.
Sure.
I guess I'll go ahead and make my comments now. I've been through this property a few times. Again, my biggest concern is the wall. As far as the building itself, the original house, there's no historic redeeming qualities left to that building. The fact that they're doing, the garage facing Washington now with 2 doors of a craftsman style, cottage style nature, is what you're saying?
Right.
Is probably more aesthetically appeasing to the neighbors and in tempo or in concert with, what would the HPC would, have under its umbrella. But I'm concerned about the wall that's on Lafayette. I've been by there several times. 75% of that wall is hand masons, and it's Manitou greenstone. I believe there's some ordinance in place that we just can't discard that.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, my major concern, if it can be passed on to planning, is for the subservient property on Lafayette. If I was them, I'd be really concerned. I don't know if that's a rental or if the owner of that building's present.
Yeah.
But I very rarely dance on something. You guys know me, but the wall that's a big deal. And again, I brought this up last time. The wall across the street was a WPA project. I would probably almost guarantee that the stone that's in this wall probably came out of that original wall and was constructed across the road. It just has that look and that feel to it. And that's period for that time. So I get it. I'll stay on as long as I can here. I'm in Denver working on a project, so
No
I'm
problem.
up here working on an old Queen Anne Victorian.
No, great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I delved a little bit deeper than I did the last time.
Right.
And looked at that, and I feel like just stacking stone up against a concrete wall is not a good alternative. They need to, and I looked, you know, there are areas of that wall that have lost some integrity, but there's, you know, it was and is a mortared stone wall, and so
Right.
they need to reuse that stone. And if they don't utilize all of the stone, which I think they probably would, but if for some reason they don't, then, you know, I need to definitely interact with them about any greenstone. I would ask them to prioritize that and make sure that they use the greenstone and, you know, mix in with the rubble and you
Right.
know, utilizes all of the greenstone as a priority. But if for some reason that they didn't, then I definitely would want them to let us have the rest of the greenstone if they could.
Well, they have, you know, that if they build a concrete retaining wall for support, which is obviously prudent, and the wall that's existing there now, the Manitou greenstone that's in there is flat stack. If they just clean it up and rotate it, I'm sure they'll have more than enough to cover that surface area. It'll be in
Right.
kind with most of the walls that are Manitou Springs, so on and so forth. It'll be a good repurposing of a material that would lend to, you know, at least some sort of historical aspect of the property. Because in my mind, I mean, I understand why we're reviewing this, but the building and the grounds outside of the wall, just, you know, after it being stuccoed and all the windows changed out, have no historic quality to them at all.
Right. Exactly.
So, because that building sits on a Manitou greenstone foundation, and it's about 18 inches above Washington, you know, which was regular practice back then.
Right.
So, you know, 120 years ago.
Because I know I support Doug in that too. I know in the survey that we're going to hear about later into the meeting, you know, one of the things that they were looking at too was the walls, because we have lots of walls that need the protection. Because sometimes that is what historically is left. And people don't purposely, you know, stucco their homes and realize what they're doing to it, but that happens when people buy into a district and don't
Right.
always understand what has to stay and why it's there. Because
Right.
stone.
Well,
Yeah.
off the record, unfortunately, somebody just comes around and sells them that it's easier and cheaper and you're going to save money and utility bills and all that kind of groovy jazz. And, you know, I'll wait till $20,000 later when the thing's cracking and they have the same issues as they did with the siding.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So it seems like Michelle's conditions cover your concerns, don't they, Doug?
Yes, they do, Ann. I appreciate that. You know, again, I just, you know, at the end of the day, when somebody comes in with a skid loader and scoops it up and it's gone in a dumpster somewhere and that Manitou greenstone hasn't been preserved, it's gone forever.
Absolutely. So I would want to make sure, what we generally do when we issue the permits is we include the conditions from the Historic Preservation Commission. And especially since the applicant's not present, I'll be talking to him about the importance of making sure he has good notes on the building plans, good instructions for the contractor, you know, that it needs to be stockpiled and salvaged. And you know, I want to make sure that that gets done. And again, what I can do too is I'll ask the code enforcement officer to go out and take some really good photos of the wall, so we've got good documentation, so we can, you know, help any mason that they employ to know what it looked like and, you know, how the stone was kind of stacked, and, you know, try to build something that, you know, not necessarily to just really, you know, down to the stone placement replicate, but
Right.
basically once it's done, it'll feel like it's been there and it'll feel like the wall that was there before.
Well, honestly, the flat stack, you know, the flat stack method is easy and durable because you get structure and depth immediately. But when you take those flat stacks and you just tip them up, then you get a lot of profile, and it really, you know, really highlights that beauty that we all love, those greens and purples and
Absolutely.
reds that make Manitou greenstone what it is.
Yeah, we usually see, that's why we usually see it you know,
Yeah.
face installed on the face instead of more like sandstone. It can be installed with the. With
Yeah,
the-
that's why I feel that it probably originated across the street.
So
Yeah.
taking those pictures, Michelle, will be good for code.
Yeah, yeah.
To go up there and really have a picture, because it helps a mason. I know when we've had masonry work, it helps they see it and then they can redo it.
Absolutely. Great.
Any other questions of the applicant through Michelle?
No,
No? Are we ready to make a motion?
We need to open up for public hearing.
Oh, yes,
All
public
right.
hearing. Dylan, is there anyone nearby?
There are attendees. If you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the raise hand button. And I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
Okay, so at this time, we're going to go ahead and close the public part of our meeting and then have the commission. Any questions or?
no, I think it's a good change, and I would move for approval of MCAC 2101 with the recommendations as outlined by Michelle.
I'll second.
Sorry.
All in favor then, raise your hand or say aye.
I,
Okay, it passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
thank you, Michelle, your hard work.
Oh, thank you.
And the next part was a presentation. I know in our packets, we had the draft of the survey results, and this is where we get the presentation from the group that have been using.
Yes, Felsberg, Holt, and Unileveg was awarded the contract for the grant-funded historic district survey plan. So this is not for, as you all are aware, but for the public, this is not actual survey work. This is a plan that they are putting together that will help the city strategize and prioritize the much needed survey work on different areas of the community. So I'll introduce Jake Lloyd, who's the project lead. I guess that would be a good way to term you, Jake. And then I'll let him introduce anybody else from his team and just take it away, Jake.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, it's nice to see everybody again. It's been a few months. Oh, sorry, Dylan, go ahead.
Got his head
Yeah,
ahead.
is there anyone else who should be pulled over as part of this?
Yeah, Erica Warzel is our other team member. Is there a delay in my audio?
I'm hearing it too.
I'm hearing it
An echo.
through somebody else's. I'm gonna mute mine in case it's.
Yeah, sometimes it just helps to mute. Hi, Erica. There she is. All right. Let me see if I can share this. Just a sec here. Oh, that's not going to work. All right. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
How's that work? Can you guys see this cover page? in the
Yes.
PowerPoint? Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, it's nice to see everybody again. I'm Jake Lloyd, for anybody that doesn't know. I'm one of the project historians from Felsberg, Holt, and Uleveg. Erica Warzel is our other historian from Clear Story Preservation. And yeah, we just wanted to give you a little run through of the draft survey plan. I know it's been distributed to the group, so hopefully you've had a chance to kind of scroll through it and check things out. But ultimately, we're at the point where it's time to share some information, and we'd like to get some feedback and open this up to discussion after we have a chance to kind of show you what we've done and what we found. And I'm hoping that you know, there's some attendees from the community that have an interest in this project, and will also provide some nice valuable information to our discussion. So from that, we'll kind of get into it here. So essentially, what we want to do is just give you a background and give anybody that's watching a background on the general purpose of the survey plan, you know, why we chose to do a survey plan, and we're not actually just jumping into the survey work at this point, and then the general approach for how we go about conducting the survey plan. And then we'll get into just sharing the results of what we found during our data collection process, which we've spent the last few months kind of digging into and really essentially trying to really dig up everything we can on work that's been conducted over the last handful of decades for the city. So we'll talk about the results of that, and then we'll get into discussing sort of what we see are what we would recommend is potential survey work in the future, and we'll try and assign some priorities to that work based on, you know, kind of what's been, where we see the gaps in the past survey work, and where there's some really good opportunities. So we'll talk about that shortly, and then, as I mentioned before, just open it up to discussion and hopefully get some good feedback. So really, you know, just to give everyone a background why we're choosing to do survey plan work at this stage. Anytime you have really, you know, we experience what, you know, Manitou Springs has done over the last, you know, 4 decades of just conducting surveys of different parts of town and really investigating little different sections that are spread out and, you know, that have been conducted over, you know, the span of 40 years. It's really good to just stop and take note of what's really occurred, you know, try and use this opportunity to clarify what sorts of survey work has been done, you know, how thorough the information collected was, and identify areas that, you know, might be, you know, severely lacking in information and good, useful historic data. And, you know, a survey plan is nice because it offers a comprehensive overview of all that work and sort of charts out a roadmap for what's to be done in the future based on what you see as, you know, good priorities, good opportunities for survey work. Maybe the community has identified some areas that are, you know, goals and objectives of the long-term plan of the city, and if survey work's lacking there, then the survey plan really helps just you know, identify some of those goals. So, and then, you know, early on in the process, the goal and the objectives of the city, and from what discussions with Michelle, it sounded like compiling survey information for all the properties in the historic district was ultimately really the long-term strategy here, right? So we've got lots of information in certain areas. Some areas we have some information, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities that we found that illustrate a real just kind of void in the overall information that's been collected. And ultimately, what's nice about having a survey plan in jumpstarting the future of survey work here is it gives the community an opportunity to get involved and become engaged with this type of work. And folks, residents change over time, so you have new people in the community. It's good to hear their voice and hear what's important to them and what they think's special about preservation in Manitou Springs. So it's just a general approach, just to kind of give sort of a background on what makes a property or a resource historically significant. It's always good to just kind of overview some of this stuff. A historic resource can be anything from a building or structure, site. It can be a district, overlooking a larger portion of a community than just a site, or it can be just an object, and these are all things that qualify for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places, which was the result of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And so, historic resources can be a number of things, but it's one thing that's kind of key to what makes a resource significant is that it meets one of these 4 criteria for significance. As the resource associated with events that made a significant, contribution, maybe they, had really set into motion the development patterns of a community or a region. They might be significant for that, or they might be significant for connections with people of importance that really made a mark on our history. Or, more typically, especially in when we're dealing with architecture and buildings, it, might a resource might be significant just for its characteristics as a type, a particular property type or an architectural style, or maybe the building or the feature possesses high artistic values. And then there's also the opportunity that a historic resource could be significant for information that it could potentially yield, maybe in the construction methods that were used, or the way things were constructed or designed. So that it's just important to kind of clarify how that comes about and how things are, how resources are really deemed significant. So our general approach here is, when creating the survey plan, is to obviously start by analyzing the existing data, any prior survey efforts. This is information that's been conducted over the course of time. In the case of Manitou Springs, there's been survey reports, and sites have been surveyed since the early 70s, and they've been conducted over the course of several decades. So it's really good to just kind of take and analyze that existing data and see what you have. A survey plan is really nice too, because it provides an opportunity for the public to get involved and provide feedback and inputs into what are important about preservation in their community. It's also, survey plan's really nice because it gives you an opportunity to sort of chart out the future and look at what might be, a high priority for survey work, or what do you think you have sufficient information on, and areas that maybe don't need additional work. And it really allows you to integrate those goals and objectives that come from other projects and things in town. It's good to, it allows you to sort of integrate those goals into preservation work too. And so typically a couple of survey types that are common are what are known as attensive level, where you're looking primarily at like one site or one property or one building, and you're collecting a high level of information and data for that site. And those are the most useful surveys to come across, and the most useful to leave behind for the future as you're conducting survey work in the future. And then there's a reconnaissance survey, which is more of a high level, might just look at a larger area, and it's more focused on documenting a collection of property types or building styles. So there's kind of a couple of different ways to tackle future survey work. And you'll see in some of the prior studies that we came across that there's both types of surveys have really evolved over time, and the amount of information you get from certain kinds of surveys, 30, 40 years ago is quite a bit different than what you can expect to find for more recent type work. So, and to go about, conducting the survey work, first thing we do when we're trying to analyze existing data, some of our methods include like that, reviewing prior reports, preservation studies. We consult the state's database of historic properties. It's called the Compass database. It's a nice resource to find additional information that maybe didn't come from a study that was focused on, Manitou Springs, for instance. Maybe it came from a transportation project or something that was unrelated to local planning. So there's quite a wealth of information that can come from that database. And then we can also consult the state's database of designated properties to see what's been listed on the National Register. And then we can look at a number of other types of resources, county records and historic topo maps and historic aerial photographs and other photographs and resources that are made available through local preservation historical societies and library resources and newspapers, etc. So there's a lot of different avenues for collecting information and finding useful data for this project. And so to give you kind of an idea, an overview on the project area that we were looking at for this project, it basically, it covers all 16 sub-districts of the local preservation district. As you can see here, they're all highlighted in various colors. But it also includes the National Register districts, which were established long ago, and for the most part fit within that local preservation district. And then we also kind of included some commercial properties here along the eastern corridor of Manitou Avenue. We thought, there's some properties of interest there, and just to be a little bit more thorough and comprehensive, we decided to include a bit more there in the project area. So to get into kind of the results and what we found, really the first and earliest survey work commenced in the early 1970s. There was a early survey project called, I'm blanking on it now, but it was Pikes Peak Building Survey, or it was conducted in 1972, and it looked at just select landmarks in places of known significance, or that were considered landmarks at the time. Briarhurst being the first survey and subsequently the first nomination in Manitou Springs by 1973. And then not much happened for a couple of years, and then 1976 rolled around and additional surveys really started coming about. That was the year of the bicentennial. So I think there was a renewed interest in preservation and in history at that time. And we see quite a few more significant properties coming about. And it really kind of set up the, those additional property surveys in 1976 set up the next round of National Register nominations, including Miramont and First Congregational Church and the Manitou Bathhouse in 1977. And then a couple of years later, the Barker House nomination. And really 1979 is when things started to really gain steam, and the HPC was formed, and The first preservation ordinance was adopted within Manitou Springs. And so by 1980, we're seeing the Manitou, the local district being formed as part of a new ordinance. And that ordinance also commissioned this really comprehensive survey of buildings in the city in 1980. And really the project area for that comprehensive survey was essentially the entire city. But it led to approximately 600 site forms, many of which are available on that Compass database, that state inventory. And the survey really concluded that there were 3 distinct areas within the city that were actually eligible for the National Register. That's where we get the downtown, the main bulk of the historic district with 1,000 sites. And then we get the Keithley Log Cabin Development District and the isolated Crystal Valley Cemetery District. All of those came out of nominations that followed that comprehensive building survey. And in 1980, we also saw the additional National Register nominations of like the Wheeler Bank and the Cliff House and so forth. And so this early survey was really interesting because a lot was looked at. But ultimately, the information, the survey information that was collected at the time was fairly limited, and you know, it had little bits of historic significance tied to certain properties, but overall, it was lacking in detail and you know, providing a really good understanding of what created that significance. Limited historic context information was established at that time. But the photos are very helpful. The photos give us an idea now, here 40 years later, what, you know, how these properties have changed. So that is pretty useful. There's those National Register districts again. And then, you know, there were a handful of other nominations in the 80s. The bridges, Cannon Avenue Bridge, and then by 1991 there was kind of this renewed interest in doing some more intensive surveys and really focusing this time on updating that central business district, today's commercial core sub-district. But that 91 survey also looked at properties that were along the eastern portion of Manitou Avenue too. So there was a little bit more included in this one. And this survey generated 209 survey forms. Again, these were, at the time, these were considered intensive level surveys, but if you look at them and compare them to what we expect today, this is, they're lacking in some pretty big details. So they do provide some interesting information, like, you know, property owners at the time, historic photographs again, which are really nice. But for the most part, they, you know, the historic context research was probably the most substantial contribution of this survey to the historic district, which is very useful today and helps really kind of set the stage for establishing significance in other properties. At the time, though, this survey did create sort of a list of properties that were deemed contributing and non-contributing, which can be helpful. Again, you know, utilizing the photographs, we can kind of compare and contrast where things have changed, you know, between then and now. So there is quite a bit of information to collect from these, but by no means are these considered like an intensive level survey today. And here's this yellow boundary sort of illustrates where that survey, that 91 survey, was conducted. So again, primarily along Manitou Avenue, the adjacent commercial properties, a little bit of Cannon Avenue and Park, but extending again all the way out to the eastern border, which was which was interesting. The year after, a similar study was conducted, generating 121 building survey forms along Ruxton Avenue. Again, very similar to the 91 survey, a nice list of contributing and non-contributing properties to the National Register District, and a bit more of an expansion on the historic context research was done, and photographs of all the properties, which are really clearly help us understand what properties look like before substantial change was occurring. So there is definitely some useful information that can be utilized from that survey. And here's a kind of the property boundary for that, or the project area. And then 93, the initial sub-districts are created. They underwent a revision in 96. Not a lot of information we really gleaned from this particular study. The boundary description was more of like a legal description, so it was a little bit hard to interpret, but definitely kind of helps paint the picture for how things have evolved over time. And then 2001 is when we really see the type of survey work that we like to see that's really helpful. This was a thorough analysis of the Spencer Avenue, Cave Avenue, known today as Agate Hill neighborhood. And at the time, 150 building surveys were conducted, but at this time, by the time this survey project started, we had the new modern 1403 OAHP forms, which are the architectural inventory forms that are still used today. They're very thorough. They provide a lot of descriptive inquiries for individual buildings. And the forms that were conducted during this survey, from our standpoint, really were nice and thorough and provide some really great background information. And ultimately, that's what you want to shoot for all your sub-districts. But that's just the nature of the evolved site forms and additional research that's available at the time. So very nice, helpful survey. And ultimately, when we looked at it, a lot of the properties have retained a lot of their integrity. So this is a really nice, so this particular survey is still very useful. Here's kind of a picture of the project area for that study. So Agate Hill being this brown area, and then the cliff dwellings site was also included in that particular study at the time. So we have some information on that as well. And then 2009 comes along, we have the Historic District Design Guideline updates. Great study, very comprehensive overview on the evolution of, just the historic district itself and the HPC and everything else that's sort of come along in since the inception of all this stuff in the early 70s. So, and really the overview on architectural styles and property types was great. The historic context there's kind of a nice good overview on that as well. So this document also very helpful and provides a good sort of synopsis on historic information and the various sub-districts and what sort of distinguishes each historic sub-district from each other. Same year, there was the historic structures assessment, which is kind of interesting. After this discussion we just heard about with the retaining walls and the Manitou greenstone and all that, this structure assessment can be pretty helpful because it's got a lot of sketches. It's got a lot of nice detail that identifies scale and construction and materials of the various stone features found throughout town. So that's particularly helpful. And that might be something to look at too as we get into the recommendations and future survey work is maybe providing an update to that. Since the stone features in town are that's kind of a signature aspect of Manitou Springs Historic District. So it's that one was particularly helpful as well. And so this is just kind of that overview map again to show where survey work's been conducted, where we have good information. And that's not even including some of the nominations for the cemetery and the log cabin district. All right, so I'm gonna hand it over to Erica for a minute. She's gonna give you a little more background on some other results that we found.
Thanks, Jake. Will you be able to forward the slides for me? Okay. Cool.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Erica Warzel, and this has been a great project. I'm really honored to be part of this team, working with Jake and his team, and as well as with Michelle on this survey plan for Manitou Springs. So I'll just dive into one of the things we also want to look at when preparing a survey plan, in addition to previous survey results that Jake just summarized for you, is what resources within the community have already been designated, either at the local, state, or national register level. In Manitou, essentially, the National Register is kind of the predominant designation type. Certainly you have your own local designation, but that in general follows how the National Register resources and districts were designated. State Register, there are actually no properties within Manitou that are individually or are only listed in the State Register, but all properties listed in the National Register are automatically listed in the State Register. So I'll just kind of quickly go through each of these. And these nominations not only kind of provide information on what's been designated, but also what's been considered important to the community in decades past, as what they focused on designating. But the information provided in those nominations also can be very helpful, either for the context of the community or pointing to historic themes, etc. So the first is Dr. William Bell's home, known as Briarhurst. This 1888 Gothic revival style was actually a replacement of his earlier home that was lost in the fire. It was designed by the architectural firm of Varian and Sterner and listed in the National Register in 1973. Okay, next, please. This is the First Congregational Church. It's in the Gothic revival. It's thought to have been the design of Robert S. Rochlab, who is a very prominent Denver-based architect, one of the first architects in the state, but that hasn't been conclusively determined yet or to date. Let's see. Okay, next, please. The Manitou Bathhouse. This is a lot of the resources that are listed in the National Register in Manitou tend to be from the late 19th century, early 20th century. This is a slightly later building as far as Manitou Springs goes and what's been listed to date. So this is a circa 1920 bathhouse constructed over the three main mineral springs, which was really kind of the initial draw of William Palmer and Bell and their counterparts, their colleagues and investors who helped plan Manitou Springs while they were promoting the Colorado Springs and Manitou Springs area as a picturesque and kind of resort area for the wealthy. So this is a later, after the era of William Jackson Palmer and Bell, constructed in 1920 within a mission architectural style with stucco and arched openings, etc. Next, please. The Cliff House was built in 1873, but had many additions added onto it in the subsequent 30 years after that first initial construction. It's a large wood frame structure on a stone foundation and has a combination of Victorian architectural stylings with a lot of Queen Anne, and all executed in native materials, which give it maybe a more rustic look than something that you find back east. Next, please. The Barker House or Navajo Apartments, also built in the early 1870s as a wood frame hotel. It's associated with Charles Barker, who was an important Manitou Springs politician. Next, please. The Wheeler Bank from 1888 was constructed for Jerome B. Wheeler, who was one of the great financiers and mining barons of Colorado in the late 19th century, and reflects a different type of style than what we typically see, but certainly common for commercial buildings from this era using Italianate and Romanesque revival architectural elements. Next, please. The Miramont or Francolone's Castle was completed in 1897 as a replica of the family chateau of Father Jean-Baptiste Francolone. The walls are of local sandstone and granite and is a mix of late Victorian architectural styles. Next, please. Then we have the Cannon Avenue Bridge, and in the next slide, we'll see the Park Avenue Bridge. These two bridges were constructed in 1906 and 1907, respectively, with the local masons in a semicircular stone ashlar filled arch bridge that replaced earlier existing timber structures. These two bridges were listed under the thematic National Register multiple property nomination for highway bridges in Colorado. And here's the Park Avenue Bridge. They're very similar to one another. Next, please. And then we have the US Post Office, which was constructed in 1940 in a colonial revival design, which is quite outside what you come to see in Manitou Springs as far as architectural styles go. And is actually, it follows a style that we see in other communities across Colorado and the US. It was following a program of US Postal Office designs, but this used local greenstone rather than brick. So it certainly is its own unique expression of this particular template, if you will, for Manitou.
Erica,
Yes.
you might want for your notes take down that the use of the Manitou greenstone was at the request of the Manitou Women's Club.
Aha. I will note that. Thank you. Well, good for them for making that request. That's good. Next, please. And this is the US Highway 24 bridge over Fountain Creek. It's actually outside the city limits, but it's certainly important to the history of the city as far as the bypass of 24 and this bridge making that construction possible. It's from 1932 and reportedly is the last bridge by the prolific Pueblo Bridge Company. And it's for bridge geeks like myself, it's a pretty cool example of a two-ribbed reinforced concrete open spandrel deck arch. I mistakenly, if you might have noticed in the draft plan that was sent to you for review, I mistakenly noted that it was demolished in 2013, but thankfully Michelle corrected that for me. And so now that has been corrected in our plan to date. Next, please. Then we have our historic districts within Manitou Springs, which Jake already talked with you quite a bit about. The Manitou Springs Historic District was listed in 1983 and of course covers almost the entire city, not all of it, but certainly its greatest concentration of historic buildings from the late 19th and early 20th century. As an example of that era's resort community types that first was planned as a grand resort spa town that evolved over time and was more accessible to those with more modest means, who first visited by means of summer cottages that were built along the grander homes and hotels, and then evolved even further with the era of auto tourism and the motor courts that sprung up with that. Next, please. The Keithley Log Cabin Development District is really reflects the picturesque mode of just rustic, simplified architecture that is meant to convey recreation within the mountains. Next, please. And then the Crystal Valley Cemetery, which is the second of the city cemeteries and opened in 1891. So it has interments from that first cemetery that were moved to this new cemetery. Its 20-acre site takes advantage of its natural mountainside setting and has a prominent greenstone chapel, cemetery walls, and gate posts. Next, please. So here is a map again where you can see that that very large Manitou Springs Historic District, the Crystal Valley Cemetery, and the Keithley Log Cabin, all of which were listed under the umbrella document known as the Manitou Springs Multiple Resource Area listing of the National Register. And then within that, those individual designations, nearly all of which occurred before the formation of the Manitou Springs Historic District, at least in the National Register, with the exception of the two stone bridges on Cannon and Park Avenues, as well as the post office. And I neglected to point out that the post office was also nominated under another thematic multiple resource nomination for post offices in the United States. So all of these really occurred within the late 1970s to early 1980s. Next, please. So after looking at all of the survey results that have been, the survey information that's been compiled to date that Jake went through, the designation that have occurred to date, we also then undertook a limited reconnaissance survey, or what might be called a windshield survey, in order to kind of visually ascertain survey or areas that might be ripe for certain types of survey based on that other information as well. So this is a kind of a predictive survey type that identifies the general distribution, location, and nature of cultural resources within a given area. They don't do anything like historic research. They're really just kind of a visual look, taking photographs of resources that are representative and illustrate either specific architectural styles, construction and material uses, a property use type, or any other kind of historical theme. So again, it helps to identify areas that should be prioritized for survey based on kind of general physical integrity of buildings seen throughout, and where the efforts of survey would be most fruitful. Next, please. Then the survey plan, we developed a historic context. This is based on all the other contexts that have been developed as part of previous surveys, and some additional research to kind of support that. It divides the history of Manitou into 4 eras. Obviously, these are very broad eras, and they're really just trying to look at kind of the big picture ways in which the town developed or changed, from its kind of native ground and expedition landmark use, essentially before it became the Manitou Springs that we know it today. Then its development into a picturesque resort. And then with the rise of automobiles and middle-class tourism of the West, how it became a destination for those types of visitors and travelers. And then from the 1970s to today, recognizing it remains, of course, a tourism destination for a particular tourist type, heritage tourists who are maybe more interested in cultural and historical resources and places to visit, but also the role in which historic preservation has helped shape Manitou as it is today, and as well as it being a bedroom community, if you will, for employment centers that are nearby. Next, please. I guess I should point out that with the historic context, also within the discussion of those 4 eras, try to point out historic themes that maybe have not been fully researched, at least in our findings to date, that might be further avenues of research or survey based around themes rather than geographic areas. So it's just kind of meant to also fuel some food for thought for future work. Next, please. So then based on that historic context for Manitou, property types, prominent property types were identified. These were broken down into boarding houses and hotels from that earlier era of resort and kind of pre-automobile tourism and visitation. Then auto courts and motels, which were first developed in the early 20th century. And of course, there are a few called out examples within the local historic subdistricts. And residences, obviously residences can range in size, scale, and architectural style. We tried to point out the different types without going into every single architectural style. That's certainly been discussed at length in other documents. But grand residences, cottages, and where those tend to be found within Manitou Springs, and of course, the log cabin subdistrict. Next, please. Then civic buildings and public resources, meaning those resources that are really meant for the residents of Manitou Springs, of course, visitors enjoying them as well, but for the local community themselves. So the public library, the wonderful Renaissance Revival style building by Thomas McLaren, the US Post Office, Manitou Springs Elementary School, and Crystal Valley Cemetery. Of course, some of these have been surveyed and others have not. So again, this property, understanding what the general property types within Manitou Springs are can also help identify where maybe some data gaps are in what we know of the built environment. entertainment venues and tourist attractions. Obviously, this is a very another large property type that includes a lot of the historic springs and their structures, but also attractions like the Cog Railway and the Cliff Dwellings Museum. Next, please. Then, of course, thank you. The commercial buildings, which are mostly found along Manitou, but also along Cannon and Ruxton Avenues. Those tend to be from late 19th to early 20th century, but then some of these have been restyled in the 1920s and on to kind of attract a quote unquote newer idea of what the Old West looked like. So that's where you see these Pueblo revival types of restylings along Manitou Avenue of earlier buildings, and then original construction that have that type as well. And then of course you have the arcade. It's between Manitou and Cannon Avenues, which has been cut, that kind of central arcade area has been covered over. Then we have religious buildings. To my knowledge, there are 4 identified religious buildings. I don't know if there are any others. 3 of these are in the Gothic Revival style and are from that development era of Manitou Springs of late 19th, early 20th century. And then the 1971 Timberline Baptist Church. Next, please. Manufacturing and industry. Of course, Manitou Springs was largely based on tourism, but did have a mineral water bottling industry. And so looking at what property types, what buildings of this context remain today. The one we know of, and if you know of others, I hope you'll share that, is the Ute Chief Mineral Water Company. Earlier ones either were converted or lost due to demolition and then kind of change in use of those properties. And then, of course, other types of industry like the hydro plant that's further up Ruxton Avenue, providing electricity and power for the city. In transportation, most of the railroad era resources associated with the Denver, Rio Grande, or Midland are no longer extant. One thing I was thinking of today that we should include in the survey plan is also the discussion of the streetcar system. To my knowledge, there's also none remaining of that type of transportation within the city as well, but it's certainly worth mentioning in the survey plan. Of course, we have the bridges, but then those later resources that are associated with the use of automobiles, like horse liveries that were converted into automobile garages, like the Manitou Arts Center on Manitou, or gas stations. And the eastern end of Manitou Avenue, there's likely to be other transportation related property types as well, based around the kind of highway use of that end of town that might be ripe for survey or further context study.
Erica,
Yes.
just to intercede again,
Yes.
take note that the Midland Terminal, or not Midland Terminal, but the original Colorado Midland Railway station is actually intact and is a private residence on Midland Avenue.
Thank you. I recall seeing that, and I'm glad you brought it to my attention again.
Yeah, the Denver and Rio Grande station was disassembled, and now its parts were reassembled, and they're in a building on South Cascade Avenue in Colorado Springs.
Right. Thank you. Okay, next, please. Okay, I think it's back to you, Jake.
Okay, thanks, Erica. excuse me. So that was, that's what we've been working on, for the last several months, is just collecting that information, trying to piece together the bits and pieces of the historic context that's developed over time, architectural and building types. And now we piece it all together, and it gives us an opportunity to really outline some recommendations for future survey work, as I mentioned earlier. And so what we did is we kind of identified survey project opportunities by sub-district to keep things consistent with those neighborhoods, because the sub-districts were really done well as far as the boundaries created for those that capture very cohesive property types and building styles. So maintaining future survey work utilizing those sub-district boundaries makes a lot of sense to us. And then we broke down the priorities into different phases. Phase 1 being the high priority survey work, to phase 2 being more medium, and then phase 3 being low priorities, as you'll see. So one of the first high priority survey opportunities we identified, and this is through discussion early in the process, was the idea of doing more of an intensive level type survey for the log cabin sub-district. If you remember, this was last really revisited as the National Register nomination in the early 1980s. Even at that time, the nomination form didn't provide, it provided a nice overview of significance for the district and how it came about. But individual properties, the information's lacking quite a bit. So to make informed decisions on, for your group, to understand building alterations and how to be compatible with maintenance and upgrades and things that need to happen, having an updated survey for this sub-district seemed to make a lot of sense. And from what we understand, there's some infill and development pressure to this particular sub-district. So, this one in our minds seemed to be a really good candidate for near-term survey work.
Well, give me a call. I'll be more than glad to talk to you about it.
Sounds good. The Villa sub-district, that was another one in early discussions that we talked about. Here's this neighborhood of grand estates on the edge of town, a very beautiful and kind of picturesque setting, and it's not included in your National Register district. So the Briarhurst was the only property that was nominated to the National Register in an individual manner, but there's all of these other really nice large estates that are in beautiful condition, that are still luckily cherished by their owners and maintained well and preserved in their historic character. So that's really nice. But individual nominations or a nomination of this sub-district, or just intensive level survey work would go a long ways to just give everybody a better understanding of the background of a lot of these properties. And I think most of these residences were looked at that 1980 comprehensive survey, and they were revisited in 1991. But again, the information is very limited, and there's not much more we can get out of those surveys than just understanding if the physical integrity has been jeopardized over time. So we thought this one would be another nice phase 1 type survey project. And it's a relatively, it's not too cumbersome. The size of the sub-district's relatively small when compared to others in terms of property count. And then kind of looking into more of the core of town, the Midland sub-district really stood out to us as a district of interesting frame houses, Really nice, good physical integrity in general. Very little alterations or infill that would be considered maybe an intrusion to that district. So that would be another really good opportunity for an intensive level survey. However, this is a pretty big sub-district, so it would be a pretty substantial undertaking to go after the Midland sub-district. But the nice thing is it's directly adjacent to your commercial core and the Ruxton Avenue sub-districts where you've already got some basic information from. And it just seems like this would be maybe a next logical step in conducting those future surveys. The Minnehaha Pilot Knob subdistrict, another really interesting kind of eclectic neighborhood. Nice cottages from more of that summer seasonal tourist era, and good integrity. Similar to what we saw in the Midland and some other sub-districts. This would be a great one to look into a little bit further, and just collect some more information. Prior surveys didn't collect much again from this sub-district, so this seemed to be another really good candidate. And so here's kind of a map that we put together for the initial draft survey plan back at the beginning of January. You'll notice we've highlighted the eastern corridor of Manitou Avenue, where after some discussions, we thought, well, maybe that's not a high priority survey area. And I'll get into that in a sec. But this in general just kind of gives you an idea of where in sort of the scale of some of the sub-districts that we've highlighted for that phase 1 survey project work. And so phase 2 would be, once phase 1's kind of undertaken, or if that seemed to make sense, you can move into more of the phase 2 priorities, which include a number of other sub-districts. Looking at just the information that was collected in the past, primarily in the 1991 survey project that looked at the commercial properties along Manitou Avenue. From what we can understand, it seems like this portion of town was included in the historic district at one time, or the local historic district, and then it was removed. Rightly so, 30 years ago, I don't think there was this auto tourism property type that you find along this section of the corridor was really on a lot of people's radars. And some of the integrity is maybe not as good as in other areas of town, but this is your eastern gateway into town. It's highly visible. This is what people see when they enter Manitou Springs. And so having some more information to understand the significance of these properties and to make informed decisions on building modifications and new infill development might be really useful. And so we wanted to kind of keep this in there at some point. Maybe this is on the lower end of the medium priority work, but we thought it's not in the historic district now, but maybe there's an opportunity there to collect some information just to help guide planning efforts in the future.
Jake, I think you'll find that the El Colorado Lodge is probably one of the finest examples of a 20s vintage motor inn that is still left out there.
Yeah, and that's a great property, great site. And that's just a really interesting era of time, the automobile era, when tourism was left to people in their cars to come for the day, as opposed to staying for several days or a week at a time. It was just an interesting evolution in the tourist industry and how the area evolved. And this particular section of Manitou Avenue just happens to have a lot of really interesting property types from that era. And some of them are intact, some aren't, but some more information would be helpful. This this is another one where it's kind of like, well, maybe, you know, the Upper Washington subdistrict, a lot of really nice houses, a lot of integrity. You know, maybe this is considered a high priority and you shuffle one of the other ones out. That's kind of for you guys to decide, and to hopefully we can have this discussion, is to just see what, you know, what everybody's priorities might be for doing survey work for some of these sub-districts. But the Upper Washington one was another one where just a really nice neighborhood and a lot of nice houses and not a lot of good information collected on these properties. So they might, you know, that would warrant some intensive level survey would be really ideal. And, you know, the steep topography is really makes it for an interesting neighborhood with all the stone retaining walls and such. And so, and I think this is the neighborhood, right, that you guys were discussing earlier with the applicant. So yeah, that, you know, might be a good priority for some work here. Crystal Valley Cemetery, that one came up. That was, you know, this is a site that hasn't, again, kind of like the log cabin district, hasn't been looked at in, you know, almost 40 years. And the nomination forms really about all the information we have on it. That's at least been compiled. And, you know, I'm sure there's more information out there, but to have some more, you know, maybe more design guidelines that are more tailored to this particular site would be really nice. There's some preservation standards for maintenance and long-term preservation of the cemetery that might be a really useful tool to have. And so intensively, you know, maybe doing a new intensive survey of the site could really facilitate that sort of work. West Manitou, really cool, you know, little area of eclectic different building styles and property types. I really enjoy walking along this area of town. But, you know, there's not a lot of information that's been collected again. And the information that we have is, you know, pushing 30 plus years old. So it might be, this might be a really good candidate for some additional intensive level, or even look at it from a reconnaissance standpoint. If you just want to gather some basic information for the area, that might be a more viable route. But being a commercial area, you know, it's probably more subject to disturbance than other areas. So it's probably that might be kind of a good reason to pursue some survey work along this part of the corridor. And it is the western gateway into town or out of town, however you look at it. And then kind of revisiting the commercial core and Ruxton Avenue. These are the two surveys that were done in the early 90s. You know, we've got some basic information on them, but depending on what sorts of development pressure you get or building alteration that is proposed for these properties, it might be good to just have an update and, you know, maybe a reconnaissance survey just to kind of show how things have evolved and changed over time would be appropriate. But yeah, the survey information we do have for this area, unfortunately, is pushing 30 years old. And that's, you know, a lot can happen over that amount of time. And so additional follow-up survey might be particularly useful. And then we thought, well, maybe just you know, depending on what sort of funding mechanisms are in play, maybe just individual nominations of individual properties would be suitable. You know, like that, the El Colorado Lodge, beautiful auto tourism, motor court property, not on the National Register, not in, you know, a National Register district. It's not individually designated and it's not a National Register district. So, you know, what sort of tools can be put into play to help, you know, foster preservation, you know, and maybe designation would be a good tool for some of these properties. And again, the Villas sub-district, there's several properties there that, if chosen not to pursue a nomination for that sub-district, maybe individual properties are looked at for individual distinction. And then phase 3, we classified a couple of sub-districts as phase 3, just based on more the prevalence of intrusions or building alterations or, infill development that's occurred that would, maybe just kind of obscure the qualities of the original sub-district. Those are the High Road and El Paso Cottages, Lower Washington and Peakview. They just seem to, they have a lot of really interesting properties, but as far as near-term survey work, maybe we put these off until later, until you get more information collected on some of the other more intact sub-districts. We also included Agate Hill as a phase 3 priority for survey work, just because you have great information on it. And it's it's 20 years old now, but that information that was conducted in 2001 for Agate Hill was great, and it still seems to apply, especially after conducting the reconnaissance survey in that sub-district. So yeah, this is, these are just what we kind of pulled together based on the information that was collected from previous studies and from conducting that reconnaissance survey, looking at the physical condition of properties today. So this is just kind of an initial recommendation, and we really would like to just at this point open it up to discussion and hear feedback. Hopefully there's folks from the community that have thoughts on this issue. And I'd be happy to just scroll around if anybody wants to talk about something in particular.
Boy, it's covered so much. I'm impressed with all the ways that you've covered the different things and the recommendations too. But Michelle, can we open it up to see if anyone in the community wants to make comments?
Sure. Yeah, if they would just raise their hand, then Dylan could bring them over one at a time, and they're welcome to make comments. If there is anybody. Or they could just listen to us talk.
There should be a little raise hand button down there at the bottom if anyone would like to make a comment.
Okay, that's fine. You can always raise your hand during the discussion as well if something sparks an idea or the desire to make a comment. In looking at some of this, I guess some of my comments, and I've already given some comments to the consultants, so I don't want to dominate this, but as I was going through and listening to Jake and listening to Erica, I would probably consider encouraging maybe moving Crystal Valley Cemetery into a little higher priority. We've really, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you noted preservation standards and design guidelines. We have nothing that helps public services manage that property. And I've talked in the last year with public services personnel, and they're very interested in learning more about that. And I just think it would be a really good thing to not only give them some better tools and us some better tools, but also look at some future planning for expansion of that cemetery, which will happen at some point, and to try and help, coordinate what might go on in a new section with the, character of the existing cemetery. So that's one thing that I think would be good. And it's hard because I can think of, reasons to move any of these up, especially ones where we don't have any real information at all. Even in the like High Road and El Paso Cottages and all of that. And so I think but I think overall that I agree with absolutely most of really all of what you guys have said. I think the East Manitou Avenue, I talked a little bit with Jake and Erica about that. I don't necessarily see, and I could be completely wrong, but I don't necessarily see the city at this point wanting to reestablish a full historic district over there. but we could certainly look at some individual landmarks and maybe do a design corridor, something that had less, you know, it was less geared just toward history, you know, have some things that are documented as historic and you know, like El Colorado and the Green Willow, and there may be another one or two that really help preserve our auto history, but then also provide the Planning Commission and the Urban Renewal Authority some design guidelines that can be used for when properties do come in to redevelop, you know, encourage preservation even on properties that aren't landmarked, but when that's just not going to be amenable to owners, you know, try to get them to incorporate design that will still help retain some of that auto development era. So that's kind of my 2 cents as far as that one goes. And absolutely.
Question just on that, Michelle.
Mhm.
So the Eastern Corridor is where people first come from, you know, into Manitou. And I think that part is it gets into more infill and more, for example, the Dillon Motel will probably be torn down soon, which can be good or bad depending on where you think. But it seems like that we need to do something because as we do the infill and we do different kinds of bridges, different kinds of roads into Manitou, how we do the vegetation. There's a whole lot of things that I would hate to lose that corridor. You know, we have the Holiday Inn coming in, we have things like that that really change the neighborhoods. And so,
Yeah.
you know, I can see maybe not being a sub-district, but I think that we need to start bringing it in so we don't lose that corridor. You know, we don't want to lose the west side for sure, and we don't want to lose the east side.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of discussion and interest to provide some design guidance for new development and for Planning Commission as they consider new and redevelopment. So I think taking a look at that, and maybe looking at some other methodologies, some other standards beside just, you know, total historic district could be better received and easier, you know, easier for us to manage, and would still go a long way to help keep the character of that area. So I think that would be a really good idea.
If I could, I'd just like to add too, as a reminder that, you know, survey is a base or lays the foundation for a possible designation, but doesn't require it or need it. It's really just collecting information. And of course, decision-making should be based on having information. So certainly having that information at your fingertips for making decisions, whether it be designation or design guidance of another kind, is nothing harmful.
Yeah.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So yeah. But yeah, other than that, I think, you know, I'm just sitting here looking at things and thinking, you know, gosh, I wish we had the money to just do it all, you know, in one big sweep. And, you know, we may need to at times look at prioritizing some things or shuffling some things around based on available funding, or, you know, we want to do a mix of intensive and reconnaissance of a couple of areas because we're able to, you know, we have enough to do an intensive in a certain area. We have enough left over to do a reconnaissance, so we can, you know, move that forward. So yeah, but I think it's great to have this kind of roadmap and the definitions. And I think what's also going to be extremely helpful that I know that you guys will provide are some cost estimates for doing the work in each of the areas based on the size, the area, and that type of thing. And that will be invaluable for us.
Yeah, and that's really the next step. I mean, the idea at this point is to give you our recommendations, and then, you know, get the feedback and incorporate that into, oh, well, you know, this really is a higher priority, like you said, with the cemetery and so forth. And then once we all kind of feel like we have the priorities laid out the way we want them, then we can really dive into, well, okay, you know, there's some grant funding opportunities to tackle some of this work. You know, what does it look like to survey the Midland District, or you know, one of these
Right.
really big ones, or you know, maybe just some individual designations. So yeah, this is definitely the next step, the cost estimate information, and I think if we can kind of
So back to the Eastern Corridor real quick, like you can, and Michelle concurs, you can cross-reference the urban renewal project that's in place right now, and they are property specific about certain sites, El Colorado Lodge, Moe's Diner, Park Road Lodge, LaFawn, and the Dillon. Those are basically the only properties that are left in the area that, you know, are more than, you know, even 20 years old. The rest of the, you know, again, most of the buildings that are done are modern or are historically insignificant. And so I don't know, Michelle, have they been given the information on the Eastern Corridor Urban Renewal Project?
That they're aware of it, yeah.
Are you aware of it? So, you know, in that they show, you know, again, there's that late mid-century 50s and 60s neon, so on and so forth things, but it starts with the El Colorado Lodge at that beginning of that era. And it's, so I guess instead of making that an entire sub-district in itself, could you be more property specific, or is that not on the table? I'm not quite sure how to ask that question.
Well, I think Erica's right that having the information then allows us to look at it and make some decisions about what would be most appropriate and how to, you know, use that information. So whether it becomes a design corridor, whether we decide it is fine the way it is, whether, you know, there are some additional properties that are individually landmarked, you know, that kind of thing, to help them be preserved. You know, I think we can look at all of that to,
Right.
we kind of know better what we're dealing with. There's been some surprises for me about some properties that I think CDOT has done some survey work through some of the projects, and some of the properties have been listed as eligible, or you know, they were found eligible that I didn't realize. And then it was like, well, yeah, when I look at it with a little bit fresher eyes, actually look at it as opposed to just drive by it, I'm like, yeah, I can see that. I mean, especially, you know, like they said, we're 40 years on from when I started with the city, and you know, that mid-century modern is the in thing now. So what Victorian used to be, it's now mid-century modern. So
Right. Absolutely.
Can I ask a question? Please. The heritage theme that you mentioned, Jake, as a classification tool, basically, can you give an example of what that would, kind of guess at what that would be? Some kind of heritage theme?
was that in the property types we were discussing?
Yeah. As an idea of how to classify. Do you have an example?
Let me see if I can find it real quick.
I know I wrote down the note like a while back, but
Oh, the heritage tourist
yeah,
tourist town.
yeah. Just
So-
as a,
I can weigh in on that. It's because that was really part of my discussion. So that wasn't really a property type, but it was just, you know, another era of how Manitou Springs has developed. And certainly the role preservation has played, both in designation, but you know, preserving historic buildings and using that as a tool to continue to attract tourists, is what is referenced in that. But that's definitely a newer era, obviously, set 1970s on, really. And so there's not necessarily a property type associated with that era of the context. But I think it's worth pointing out of how preservation has played a role in the way Manitou Springs is today.
okay.
So Jake and Eric, are you here in Denver?
I'm in Denver. Yes.
Yeah.
You're in
Eric is
Denver.
in
So
Denver.
the Lumber Baron Inn in the Highlands.
Oh,
Stayed there.
yes.
Yeah, wonderful building.
Very nice.
Great, incredible restoration.
Let's go.
I'm in one of those
Field trip!
1950s mid-mod buildings that Michelle was talking about.
Where
So
are
very
you at? Where are you at? What part of Denver are you in?
southeast.
Southeast. I'm at 24th in Washington right now. 5 Points, the hood, where I belong.
True.
Well, great.
So you're
Well,
Bonnie Bray, right? Is that the area you're in? Bonnie Bray? Is that what it's
I
called?
It's nearby, yeah.
yeah, I love that area.
Yeah, wonderful brick buildings.
Oh, yeah. And a real cautionary tale when you drive by sometimes and see some of the little bungalows, little brick buildings, some of the little brick duplexes that have been bought and turned into this, huge McMansions that just eat up, the area. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, height variances, lot density. I don't see how in the heck they're getting away with it.
Yeah.
The Highlands, they put the kibosh on that, but
Yeah.
So
thanks for the HPC, right?
I was curious if any of you had thoughts on, we in the recommendations that we're making to you all, those are very geographically based. And I was just wondering if there's any aspect of Manitou's history or a property type or something that you think is unrecognized or needs further study that hasn't been adequately addressed. And I think there's a lot that can be accomplished through the geographic areas that we're talking about, because that survey will kind of bring up those resources in those areas. But I was just curious, just to kind of, again, encourage your all feedback on the plan and making sure it's what you want and need it to be. If you had any thoughts on kind of historic themes, if you will.
I think it's a really interesting way of trying to look at some things. And the beauty with having geographic information mapping and everything is that we could start sorting, as we develop surveys, in a geographic area, and as that, gets more and more survey forms, you could sort them, as long as you make sure that you have those keywords in there. You could start putting together mapping showing, those different themes, as they get picked up in the different areas. So whether you did a survey based on that theme or whether you stayed with kind of the geographic, but just made sure that you were looking for those themes as well. Over the period of time, you could kind of have your cake and eat it too. You could have it both ways, which I think would be really interesting. I mean, we definitely need better information and more information on our historic stone walls and bridges, and that type of thing, our historic stonework. And so having that be something that is either pulled out as a separate focus where, people just go all over town looking for those, or whether that information is gathered as we go through geographic areas, but then being able to map that and show the spread, and what those resources look like in the different areas of town, I think would be really great and very helpful.
I think also an answer to it. Go ahead.
There is a person in the attendees who has their hand raised, and they've also made a comment in the chat.
Oh,
Go ahead and send them over.
yeah, send them over.
Roxanne, if you could state your name and address for the record.
Roxanne, it looks like you might need to.
Am I muted? Are you able to hear me now? Yes,
We
I'm
hear
seeing
you now.
hands nodding.
We got you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Please state your name and address.
Yeah, Roxanne Eflin. I do live in Colorado Springs. I'm the past president of the Historic Preservation Alliance of Colorado Springs and a Manitou Springs, fourth generation Manitou Springs connection. I am so excited
hold on.
about this presentation.
Roxanne, could you state your address?
Oh, yeah, 6413 Burrow Drive, Colorado Springs, 80923. My comment here about talking, and Erica was asking if there were any more themes or something that was missing. I'm thinking about the artists in Manitou Springs and the work that they did in the 70s and the 80s to really bring revitalization and land Manitou Springs as one of the original 30 Main Street demonstration communities in the nation, and how important art and culture has been to revitalize Manitou Springs. And I'm not really seeing that as an important theme. I'm thinking of specifically Commonweal. That was for this kind of ground zero for the movement of the artist community, revitalizing the community. And I think it would be nice to call that out in the survey and perhaps look at specific locations that link to artists.
Yeah, and we have a number of those. So that would be a great theme.
That's great. Thank you.
And Roxanne, I'd like to concur. Of course, there's the ever-present element of Charles Rocky and his impact, and his ownership of that was Bell's drugstore, was it not, Michelle? Yeah,
yeah,
wasn't that Bell's drugstore?
It wasn't Bell's, but it was a drugstore. I can't.
Yeah, it was the old drugstore there.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, the quote unquote hippie artist presence in Manitou Springs of the late 60s into the early 1970s, and becoming more engaged and responsible in the community, have had a tendency to have more of a sense of preservation and embellishment to the spirit of the heritage and history of Manitou Springs.
Yeah.
And they are definitely pivotal to that. And the MAC, of course, the Manitou Arts Center, the Chuck Murphy restoration of what was the old city shops, so on and so forth. I mean, that definitely, out of anything, could be maybe a new next gen of historic or heritage preservation in Manitou. We don't have a lot of we don't have a lot of modern buildings in Manitou. I mean, basically, we have some hotels and a couple of condos, and they're not building like they are 4 or 5 blocks from here. It's.
And Michelle, I had a question about I don't know the age of some of our parks, that we have within the city and on the outskirts, and then also I don't know where heritage trees fit into the whole thing about noting some of those things that when we lose them. And that relates to what we do with the development also. So,
Right.
Because some of our parks are, get squeezed, and
right.
As a town, I think that's part of, as we're the gateway to our trail and the gateway to all the trails we have, to lose our parks to development, or additional things added that aren't really has parks or designated as places to relax and enjoy nature.
Our historic kind of traditional parks and public places, a lot of our parks were developed around springs. The springs themselves are a theme, I would think, and warrant special attention, if not necessarily a special study. But I think that's a great idea, because all of our parks in the core, the city had, there's interesting history behind that. The city had to buy park property because there was no requirement for developers to provide that in for many, many years. So I think that parks and public places is a good theme.
Well, Memorial Park. My Memorial Park was, you know, the front yard of Manitou House, and that was the first designated park. Remember, it was
Right,
for Eber Duclos.
right.
You know, for a town this small, we have had a singular dedication for better part of 90 years
Yep.
for one park, for the largest park in the city.
Great.
Any other discussions or questions or comments? And we thank Deborah for speaking up. Appreciate that.
I don't have anything more. And certainly for those people that are in attendance and have been listening, if you think of something else, you are absolutely more than welcome to email me and I'll pass it on to Erica and Jake. I just think this is great. And I'm really glad people are thinking about these things.
It's a critical time.
I would like to thank Erica and Jake for all your hard work. And I would also like to extend an invitation that if you guys ever need anybody to help walk you around the place, I'm here for you. So
Great.
I don't have nothing but time on my hands.
Thank you. We'll definitely take you up on that.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm Douglas Keithley Edmondson, by the way. The Keithley Cabin Historic District was my great grandparents.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, Doug owns some of the best cabins in the area. So yeah.
Living the dream, brother.
But wait a minute, I'm the one that lives in the house that's fireproof from your wonderful ancestor. Okay.
Yeah, but that's it. See, that was like a Frank Lloyd revival house. He did that tri-level in-floor radiant heat, glass block,
Yes.
1949. I mean, how she can you get?
And it's fireproof. Thank you.
And it's fireproof.
Keithley.
Yeah, you're gonna die in that place.
Yep. Yep.
See, we have a long tradition of many, many generations. So.
Yeah, we do. So.
Great. Did you need anything else from us, guys?
No, I think that's it. You know, we just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to speak up and hear some feedback. So we appreciate it, and thanks again for taking so much time to let us run through this project. And we look forward to finishing it up over the next month or so.
We're looking forward to that too.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Photographs are wonderful.
Great, and thanks to all those at home from the community and Roxanne for voicing some interests and concerns. That's extremely helpful for us.
Absolutely. Say hi to Joanne, Roxanne.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Moving on to the other business, I guess. Do we have any other business?
We don't.
We don't. And then going on to any council action.
I have no council action to report.
All right. Well, I guess what we can do is have a motion to leave. Adjourn our meeting.
Adjourn. Okay. Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Doug.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
If I can find my cursor.